Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Farjou, and I'm the Earth Day Canada Project Manager for the EcoHack-a-City program. I'm very happy to see you all here today for the fifth and final public panel of the 2021 EcoHack-a-City series hosted across Canada. I know it is upsetting, but don't be sad. We're already planning the 2022 edition, and we will be back with brand new themes and new Canadian co-hosts. For today, our panel, co-hosted with the City of Calgary, will address the theme of getting to net zero, and will explore building energy efficiency and the role of building retrofits. As for the other events hosted this year, this roundtable kicks off a 10-hour training for stakeholders in the municipal, business, and nonprofit sectors starting next week. Today's panel is here to help and inspire them as they will dive further on the topic and identify new areas or existing areas where further action with more impact can be taken. If you are curious about the findings of the training, they will be available on the Earth Day Canada website at a later date, and we will notify you when they are available. For more information on the EcoHack-a-City program and on our other Earth Day Canada programs supporting municipalities towards sustainability, please visit our website. I'll post the links in the chat shortly. All right, I think it is time to get things started. And so without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce your moderator for the next hour and a half and our welcome speaker, Dick Ebersohn, Manager of Climate Change and Environment at the City of Calgary. Dick's 27 years of experience in urban planning, sustainability, and climate change provides us for a solid base in facilitating change in communities. Dick spearheads the City of Calgary's efforts to reduce carbon emissions and climate risk in Calgary via the city's climate resilience strategy and action plans. The plan is currently being updated to reflect the pace and magnitude of change to get to net zero. Dick studied anthropology, geography, sustainability, and urban planning in South Africa and Sweden. Welcome, Dick.
Thanks so much, Emily. Really appreciate this introduction. And welcome to everybody from afar. I heard you say we've got quite a few people from Montreal out at East and quite a few people from Calgary. And I would like to welcome everybody to today's session. It's really an honor and privilege to be part of this. And I want to thank Earth Day Canada for hosting this with us and presenting this very interesting and I think topical subject of our time. And, very interesting point today as well on Council's agenda. I've seen that we also have our mayor bringing forward a notice of motion on a climate emergency declaration here in Calgary. So very, very timely, this discussion. And as we look at the city's climate resilience strategy and action plans, a key area in there is to look at buildings and how we can transform our buildings and help them move towards a zero carbon point in 2050. It is really important that we bring new knowledge to the table. And therefore, I'm very happy to see that we have three very interesting speakers here with us today that have practiced in this field and that will help us understand what those opportunities and challenges might be in how we move this forward. And so with that, I would like to start kicking off our program. Emily, is that good with you?
Yep, let's do it.
Let's do this. So I want to first provide you with a few housekeeping items. And before I introduce the speakers, let's go over them. So this is a Zoom webinar, which means that for this event, the audience does not have video or audio options. And to participate in the event, there are two options. The first is the chat function. That's where you can share your thoughts and comments. And then there's also the Q&A function. So please go there and put your questions in so that we can ensure we see what you are providing to us and asking of us. A welcoming environment is important for all the voices to be heard. We encourage healthy debates and of course diverging opinions. They're all natural, but let's make sure to treat everyone with respect. Deliberate disruption will not be tolerated during this event. Here's a quick review of the schedule for today. We're going to listen to the panelists. That's 15 minutes each. Then there will be a discussion amongst the panelists. And then there would be a Q&A from the audience. So before introducing our speakers, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that we are broadcasting from the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7. This includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Iitka Nakota Wichitobi First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. The City of Calgary is also homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and Métis Nation of Region 3. So with that, let's jump in and introduce our first speaker. It's really a pleasure for me to introduce Betsy Agar, who's a senior analyst in Buildings and Urban Solutions program at the Pembina Institute, Canada's leading clean energy think tank. She designs policy and programs for the retrofit of BC's residential building stock, including the leading local government Readiness for Deep Retrofits project, overseeing the Green Buildings Jobs Map and helping launch the Reframed initiative, Pembina's deep retrofit market development program. Prior to joining the Institute, Betsy was a founding member of Renewable Cities at Simon Fraser University Centre for Dialogue, which she collaborated with colleagues from around the world to expose barriers to implementation for communities fully empowered by renewable energy. Betsy is a building science engineer and holds a Master's of Applied Science from McMaster University. She also serves as a director on the board of Climate Action Edmonton, host of Retrofit Canada, and as an advisor to Recover Initiative. Betsy, it's so good to see you here, and welcome, do I say, all the way from Edmonton, as I heard that when I said that? Nevertheless, Betsy, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks, Dick. I'm going to pop on for a second here. I woke up this morning. I think my sixth senses were going off because at 5 a.m. I discovered we had no power. So I'll turn off my video for the sake of my battery, and also it doesn't look very good. I am actually calling in from Vancouver, the traditional territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam. But it's funny you would say that, Dick. I used to tell people I was from Edmonton because my first memories are from Edmonton. I lived there from when I was 2 to 5. So I'm still feel quite connected to Alberta. As Dick mentioned, I'm a senior analyst with the Buildings and Urban Solutions program at Pembina Institute. We're a national nonprofit clean energy think tank. We have offices across Canada. We work in several areas, including renewable energy, oil and gas policy, climate policy, and energy efficiency, including in buildings, which is, of course, what I'm discussing today. I also want to extend my congratulations to Mayor Jyoti Gondek, who is tabling the climate emergency today. She's right. We really are in a climate emergency. And today I want to show you how our buildings are part of the problem, as well as how they could be part of the solution. I'm going to kick off by making the link between buildings and climate, health, welfare, and economic risk. Then I plan to shock you with the sheer scale of what lays ahead of us. And then once I have your attention, I want to show you why I'm optimistic, and then end with some ideas to get things rolling here in Calgary. Thanks, Emily. We can go to slide 2 now. We know without a doubt that our buildings are contributing to climate change. Burning fuel for heating and electricity production emits carbon and other pollutants into the atmosphere. Before they're even up and running, carbon is emitted during construction and manufacturing of the materials that are embodied within them. In Calgary, buildings emit nearly 65% of the annual emissions, according to the mitigation plan. And 2/3 to 3/4 of Canada's buildings are expected to still be up and running as of 2050. You're on slide 3, Emily. I think it's delayed. Thank you. We need to retrofit to adapt to this new climate reality. In recent years, Calgary has suffered more than its fair share of flooding, poor air quality, and extreme temperatures. And the current pandemic has made people acutely aware that buildings must be able to protect us in times of crisis. Oral from Greta Thunberg, our buildings are on fire. The majority of our buildings are not climate ready, and we are just beginning to understand the potential costs of recovery, rising insurance premiums, and in some cases, lives lost. Now consider that we spend upwards of 90% of our lives inside, right? We need to retrofit for our health. Indoor air can have as much as or higher levels of pollution than outdoor air. Poor indoor air quality can lead to sick building syndrome, can aggravate respiratory disease like asthma and allergies. It can intensify transmission of infectious diseases like COVID-19, and it can be particularly risky for the elderly and particularly young and people living with chronic illness. Reducing energy demand and carbon pollution aren't the only reasons we should be retrofitting. Slide. We also need to retrofit to improve equity. 16% of Calgarians are living with high energy cost burdens, meaning they need to choose between staying warm and eating. Also, over half of Calgary's homes are more than 30 years old and due for major repairs. In 2017, Statistics Canada reviewed housing conditions across the country and found up to a quarter of Canadian homes have moisture problems. Nearly 10% have poor indoor air quality, and 17% of homes need major repairs. And that number is even higher for homes on reserve lands at 43%. That's more than double the national average. I'm on slide 6. Canada has set a net zero emissions target by 2050, and that's just 30 short years away. We estimate that we need to retrofit and electrify 600,000 homes and over 750 million square meters of commercial space every year. We need a paradigm shift in how we deal with existing buildings to meet that unprecedented pace and scale that's required. Slide. Industry knows how to do these, but there are some things standing in the way. On one hand, industry capacity is limited. Innovative solutions developed around the world are not readily available in Canada. And without clear regulations, there is no motivation for this to change. From the demand perspective, deep retrofits, they're just complex and they require significant upfront investment. People trust the technologies they've known all their lives. When we installed a heat pump in our house, my neighbor quipped that we have all these magic things in our house because we also have solar heating for our pool. Heat pumps aren't magic. It's just that we really only think of them as refrigerators and air conditioners. Right? Don't get me wrong, electrification of heating in Alberta has additional challenges. Currently, 90% of heating is by natural gas. Alberta has Canada's second dirtiest electrical grid. Electricity is 5 times more expensive than natural gas. All of this just reconfirms that electrification has to be accompanied with deep energy reductions, and the province needs to aggressively change how electricity is produced, such as through smart integration of renewable energy. Here's where I get optimistic. Well, I'm not quite yet. On the downside of all of that, there are real costs to inaction, or worse, locking in fossil fuel-based heating systems. At the simplest level, properties that are not ready for increasing intensity and frequency of extreme weather events will not be valued as high as others. Recovering from extreme weather events can be expensive, and residents of Lytton, BC know that better than anyone right now. FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, estimates that every dollar invested in climate change adaptation for our infrastructure is estimated to save $3 to $6 in recovery costs. That climate change has been cited as the reason that home insurance rates increased by 5 to 10% on top of inflation in 2019. And insurers are warning that climate change may make insurance coverage unaffordable for people. They're also calling for risk disclosure requirements. You add to this that utility costs are rising faster than the consumer price index of 1.7%, in some cases as high as 6% a year. Then there's the federal carbon tax, which is scheduled to grow to $170 by 2030. got ahead of myself, but this is where I'm really feeling optimistic. Retrofitting Calgary's existing homes and buildings can be a catalyst for renewal and growth. I'm showing you a case study we did on Edmonton's homes, which we estimate to use more than 40 gigajoules of energy per year, emitting over 3 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. To help Edmonton reach its 2050 carbon neutral goal, retrofits will have to ramp up to 3% per year, to the tune of $320 million per year. The upside, every $1 million spent on retrofitting generates about 9.5 jobs. I mean, the serious, deep retrofit strategy by Edmonton could generate 3,000 long-term, good-paying local jobs. Right? Calgary's construction industry is already building and installing the advanced technologies that can achieve the multiple objectives of a high-performance building and do it affordably. Cold climate heat pumps are an example of one of those advanced technologies that can be used in places like Calgary when paired with energy efficiency upgrades. Right? Alberta's grid is also getting cleaner by transitioning off coal and increasing renewable energy. I recently learned that Calgary is the sunniest major city in Canada with 333 clear days. That's nearly 3 times more than Austin, Texas, which has 150 per year. It's no wonder that Vulcan, Alberta was just in the news for having the largest solar project in Canada. My colleagues Bina Jacomar and Jan Gorski just published an opinion piece hailing Canada's opportunity to electrify and calling for interconnection between provincial electrical grids. We need to rethink our systems. Imagine the solar of the prairies backed up with the hydro from BC, Manitoba, and Quebec, acting as national grid batteries, storing up all of that solar during the summer season and replenishing with their own hydro flowing throughout the winter. Replacing furnaces with air source heat pumps now can help stop the cycle of natural gas lock-in and help Canada break its fossil fuel habit. Right? COVID-19 has shown how rapidly we can transform what we do. Just like Energy Sprong is showing the world how to transform the building retrofit industry. Energy Sprong literally means energy leap in Dutch, and it is revolutionizing the retrofit process by applying modern production methods to an industry that is as old as civilization. Their solutions include prefabricated exterior wall and roof panels, high efficiency and low carbon mechanical systems, system controls and performance monitoring, as well as on-site renewable electricity. Their early iterations could be installed within about 2 weeks. That's down to 1 day on site now. Off-site construction is considerably less disruptive to residents. And initially, the incremental deep retrofit measures cost about 130,000 euros per unit. They've cut that cost in half. 6 years and several pilots later, they've also added solar and are reaching net zero. And one of the most recent developments is what they call the Magic Box, which houses all of the HVAC equipment along with the solar inverter monitoring and controls, and all in a single exterior that is integrated within the exterior wall retrofit. And they're still aiming for better. Right. Energy Sprong is now being syndicated throughout Europe, and versions of it are appearing, including here in Canada. I'm on slide 14, Emily. In the interest of time, I won't speak to all of these. Draw attention to Retrofit Canada. This is an initiative. I've lost connection on my computer. Can you still hear me, Emily?
Yeah, you're back on now.
Great. Slide 15, please. The Reframe initiative is fostering an innovative.
Betsy, can you hear me?
Emily, why don't we check on the backside for Betsy if she has some other problems on her end?
Yeah, let me do that.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
It's still a bit. Yes, try that again, Betsy.
Sorry about that.
No
On
worries.
slide 16.
Yeah, Well, let me move there.
Okay. So this graphic illustrates the market transformation I think is needed while keeping equity at its center. We need actionable data so we can know more about how our buildings are performing. We need access to technology and innovation. We need capacity. We need creative financing and incentives that recognize the full value of these retrofits, not just relatively minor energy cost savings. We need clear directives so that industry and building owners can plan appropriately. Slide 17. The reframed to help us start understanding what's needed. The reframed partners, BC Housing and Metro Vancouver Housing, are contracting design teams to develop schematic designs, retrofits for 6 low rise. Through the reframed lab, the teams will participate in a 6-month collaborative design process where they can draw on experts and each other's insights in live design time. With an eye to scaling up, teams will also be asked to consider how their designs could be replicated on the other buildings in the cohort, which are all of similar archetype. Slide 18. Keep going. Design teams will be developing deep retrofits that not only make the buildings more energy efficient and low carbon, but also resilient to shocks such as earthquakes, storms, and heat waves. Smart grid integrated to help utilities better manage loads and healthy. In the meantime, I want to leave you with some thoughts on Calgary's opportunities to transform existing buildings. I'm not going to have time to go through all of this in detail, but coming out of the climate resilience strategy action plans and starting with the mitigation plan, there's some good pieces in there, and there's further steps that I think Calgary could take. Keep pursuing an energy step code, but also set a timeline and add targets, including carbon targets. That's a missing piece from the BC Energy Step Code that many people are pushing for. We need to show some leadership on retrofit code. Unfortunately, the national model code has been deferred to 2030. That's a full 8 years past when the Canadian framework recommended that it be implemented. When you're looking at incentives, they need to go beyond weatherization. We need to be looking at deep retrofits, or else we're going to be back here re-retrofitting the same buildings in 20 years. We also need to do financing mechanisms beyond energy performance. We need to be fully cap the full social benefits of retrofitting these buildings for the reasons that I stated before. And you also need to take your solar opportunity as a step towards economic resilience. There's a great opportunity in actually developing out the whole solar economy in Alberta. There are other tools such as rezoning, introducing carbon regulations, as well as introducing heating permits. So you have better control on what people put. I think the timelines and targets. For example, needs a timeline and objectives, such as achieving better air quality in homes. Energy efficiency needs to be a part of the plan to prevent overheating. The American Council for Energy Efficient Economy has found that
Betsy, can you hear me? Sorry, you're breaking up again.
Emily and Betsy, why don't we take a look at how many more slides do we have to go at this point?
A couple, just 2.
Betsy, can you perhaps just flip through the rest of your slides so that we can take a look at that if you can hear me? And we can see how we can share the rest of the conversation. I see we are at our last slide here. And Betsy, we're going to give you a chance to see if you can fix your connection and the power on the other side as we continue into this conversation. I hope that is okay with everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Yeah. So Betsy, we're gonna conclude your presentation at this point in time, and everybody, just join me in thanking Betsy again for her presentation here today. Really interesting, and I'm looking forward to this discussion in our panel as we move forward. And no worries, Betsy, we understand this completely. Why don't you fix this up for us while we move on to our next speaker, if that's okay, Emily and others?
Yeah, that works. Thank you.
Oh, okay, fantastic. So let's move on to our next speaker. Graham Twyford Miles is the Director of Energy Planning and Innovation with the University of Calgary's Office of Sustainability. He leads energy innovation, climate action planning, and green building strategy for the university, and provides strategic leadership in the development of long-range energy efficiency and decarbonization initiatives. Graham joined the university in fall of 2021 after nearly 15 years as a planner and sustainability consultant with Stantec. Graham served as a principal with the firm's sustainability and building performance practice and held a range of leadership roles in Vancouver, Toronto, and Ottawa. At Stantec, Graham led portfolio-based building performance and GHG greenhouse gas emission, of course, management projects for institutional clients across Canada, including PSPC, BGIS, UBC, Thomson Rivers University, and Canada Post. Graham holds a Master's of Urban Studies in Sustainable Urban Development from Simon Fraser University and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Urban Geography from UBC. Graham, welcome, and we're so looking forward to your presentation today. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dick. Can everyone hear me?
Yes,
yep. Okay.
We can, thank you.
Great. Fall 2021 really means about 4 weeks ago. So I'm the newly minted director within the Office of Sustainability at the university. I'm also a newly minted Calgarian. I think Betsy and I have swapped places. I just made the move from Vancouver a couple weeks ago. Very happy to be joining you here this morning. Thank you, Emily and team for the invitation. But I'm also very happy to be in Alberta and really excited to be part of this broader team of climate action champions and sustainability advocates, and looking forward to continuing good work around sustainability and climate action here in Alberta. And I have appreciated, Betsy pointed out, the sunniest major city in Canada being Calgary, and I have certainly appreciated that over the last couple weeks, particularly in contrast to the October-November rains in Vancouver. So very happy to be here, and thank you, everyone. So I'm going to talk. I've been asked to talk about a really wonderful project at the university that partially opened a year ago, and phase 2 is underway now. It's the McKimmie Complex redevelopment. I'm going to give a little bit of context around existing building retrofits and the imperative around them for climate action. A bit of an introduction in terms of the university's approach to climate action and climate strategy, and then talk a bit about the project overall and some of the lessons learned. So I will share my screen here. Bear with me. All right, Emily, is that showing up?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, Graham.
Great, thank you. So meeting our Paris targets is going to require a significant contribution from the existing building sector. The Canada Green Building Council did a really deep dive a number of years ago into the existing building retrofit space and concluded that the largest opportunities for us in terms of existing building retrofits are, as it happens, in Alberta and in Ontario. Alberta because of our really carbon intensive grid, Ontario because of the significant scale and size of their building portfolio. And they concluded that the biggest opportunities are in 1960s and 1970s building stock, in offices, in retail in the form of malls, in arenas and civic buildings, but also in universities, as they happen to have a very substantial portion of building stock in the 1960s, 1970s space. And they concluded that the initiatives that would be most effective in terms of building retrofits were recommissioning. So energy efficiency and demand reduction through best practices in building management. Electrification, particularly in markets like British Columbia, Quebec, and Manitoba with a low carbon grid, and renewable energy, particularly in markets like Alberta with a much higher emissions intensity associated with their power. And then finally, they concluded, and this is really important, that there's a specific and significant role for public sector organizations to lead in this space and to demonstrate the viability and the effectiveness of existing building retrofit projects. And universities have a significant role to play. The report didn't talk about adaptation. The report dates back to 2017. But I think it's becoming increasingly clear, and Betsy alluded to this in her remarks, that our existing building stock is not up to the task of responding to climate change and responding and adapting to that climate change. And recommissioning projects have a significant can have a significant impact on our ability to adapt at a building and portfolio level. So universities as market leaders, what is our role? I argue that campuses offer enormous potential as solution labs for the urban built environment. We effectively operate as small cities, and have a significant opportunity for innovation in that small city space. And we often have approval processes and funding models that are a little more nimble and a little more responsive than much larger municipal environments. And that ability gives us the opportunity to provide demonstration projects to the market. What you're looking at here is just a small sampling of some of the innovative projects that the University of Calgary has undertaken in the last number of years, and their reference to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So how is Calgary approaching climate action, or the University of Calgary approaching climate action? The university's climate action planning aligns with the federal government's Paris commitments. And in alignment with those commitments, we've committed to a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. We released our first climate action plan in 2010, and it was updated in 2019 with 4 focus areas: green power, so that's fuel switching, new building innovation through high performance buildings for new construction on campus, decarbonization of our existing district energy facility, which is a natural gas fired cogen plant, which also provides, in addition to thermal energy via hot water, provides through heat recovery, electric power to campus buildings that is significantly cleaner than the Alberta grid. So that's provided us with a short-term, very significant but short-term reduction in our emissions associated with that facility. But ultimately, in order to meet our targets, we're looking at a full-scale decarbonization of that plant, and we have a study underway right now, actually, to explore options for doing that by 2030. And then finally, the subject of our discussion this morning is the focus on existing building retrofits. So the plan's achieved a 33% reduction in annual emissions on campus since the outset. That's relative to 2008, and that's despite a very significant increase in campus population and also in the footprint of our built area. And you can see on the right through our reporting out some of the reductions over time. So our approach in the deep retrofit space is really governed by a portfolio-based analysis. And you can see here, there's a lot of data on this slide. The individual data points aren't important. The message that I want to convey here is that a relatively small number of buildings on our main campus have a very significant, have an outsized impact really on energy use and emissions for the campus as a whole. Our top 3 buildings on the left represent a full third of our energy and emissions on campus and utility costs as well. The top 8 represent 50%, and the top 20 represent the vast majority, 75% of our energy and emissions footprint as a campus. So when we're looking at where and how to spend our resources in managing our building carbon footprint through retrofits, we're looking at that top 10. And the McKimmie project, which I'll talk about in a moment, prior to its redevelopment would have been in that top 10. So the McKimmie complex falls right in that sweet spot that the CAGBC identified. It's a 1960s complex that was really is one of the longest standing buildings on the campus. The block itself was the second building constructed on what is now the main campus. The adjoining tower was constructed a few years later, and the 2 buildings combined housed the university's library for many years until 2012. At the outset of our redevelopment project, and this was really the trigger, the buildings were suffering from major systems deficiencies. Envelope mechanical, electrical systems were all beyond their serviceable life. And there was very poor energy performance that really wasn't in line with the university's aspirations or our climate action targets. With support from the Alberta government, the university began the project of redeveloping the complex in 2016. The scope of the project was set to include a major renovation and expansion of the tower and a complete replacement of the office block. And from the outset, the project included a significant focus on sustainability and a commitment to zero carbon design. And the decision to undertake the retrofit versus a full demolition and rebuild was influenced by a number of factors. First and foremost, it saved a year of construction time and the costs and disruption associated with that time. And of course, not insignificantly, there were substantial benefits, obviously, from an embodied carbon and life cycle analysis perspective by reusing the original concrete structure versus a new foundation and structural system. The program for the redeveloped complex includes administrative office space, student study space, lecture theaters, classrooms, and the Hunter Hub for entrepreneurial thinking. In total, the renewed tower and new link and block buildings include more than 33,000 square meters of new and redeveloped space. That's about 350,000 square feet. The building supports 500 full-time students and more than 1,300 staff. So this is a very significant complex in the center of UCalgary's main campus. And the tower, which is the focus of this discussion, opened in the fall of 2019, so just about 2 years ago. And the block and link buildings are currently under construction, and they're slated for completion in mid to late 2022. The targets, there were targets established for EUI and TEDI, thermal energy demand. They're on the screen, less than 100 kilowatt hours per meter squared for energy use intensity and less than 36 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year for TEDI. So there were significant investments in the building above and beyond a business as usual approach to meet and exceed zero carbon levels of performance. And that investment was largely in the envelope and in the renewable energy generation in the form of solar PV. Significant capital, because of this approach, significant capital savings were realized on mechanical systems, and that that savings was redirected into an investment into the structure and the double facade. Considering the dramatically reduced utility costs for the building, and we're looking at about it, we're anticipating about an 85 to 90% reduction in those costs. It's estimated that our return on investment, or our net present value, in making this building a zero carbon building is very positive. Relative to a baseline, we're looking at about a $10 million net present value in the most likely scenario. Important to note that the university's baseline building is probably higher than your typical commercial developer, where we would be comparing to a LEED Gold building with an energy performance of about 25% better than code. So our baseline is significant, but above and beyond that baseline, the project still provided us with a very significant return. And that return doesn't quantify in any meaningful way all of the additional benefits. And again, Betsy alluded to this around wellness, resilience, adaptation, productivity, and student and staff recruitment and retention. It's really important to emphasize that this was not a business as usual project with a zero carbon bolt-on. Partway through the planning process, the project was conceived as a zero carbon building from the very outset. That was part of the university leadership's DNA and approach to the project from the very beginning. And so the approach to the project differed from standard projects from the very beginning. It required rethinking the design process. And as a function of rethinking the design process, it required rethinking our approach to procurement and our approach to partnering and teaming with the consulting, engineering, and design community. The team members are on the slide in front of you. I just want to mention that Dialogue was engaged in a number of roles, but Architect of Record in particular, they, in large part, I think that was a function of their leadership and experience in the Government of Canada's first zero carbon building in Toronto. That's the Arthur Mahan building. So that hands-on, on-the-ground experience with a similar project was incredibly important to us. And then the other one I want to highlight is TransSolar Engineering out of Germany. They're a global leader in performance engineering for zero carbon buildings, and the university very much wanted a team with lived experience around design and construction of buildings of this caliber and of this performance. So what did this actually look like? The design concept was a warm jacket around the existing concrete structure. What you're looking at is the original tower on the left, the deconstruction of the envelope and cladding systems in the middle, and the final constructed tower on the right. The original tower with its precast concrete cladding and the outboard structural system was effectively a radiator. It was just filled with thermal breaks and just dumped heat into the outdoors. So our design solution, the university's design solution, was a double skin facade wrapped around the outboard concrete structure and eliminating entirely thermal breaks associated with the structure. What you're looking at on the left is an image to highlight the activated facade. It opens and closes in response to temperature conditions in the cavity space of the double skin envelope. You can see a member of the design team standing in that envelope. You have the exterior of the building on the right-hand side of that image, and the interior to the left of the blinds on the left-hand side. So the cavity space in turn supports passive heating and cooling for a significant portion of the year, and that's supplemented by active systems when and if they're needed. It's also worth noting that the design leverages the concrete mass of the structure. For example, in the summer, night flushing cools the building and the concrete, and then over the duration of the day, the concrete slowly absorbs the heat and helps maintain thermal comfort. I should also note that the pursuit of the zero carbon standard and an ultra low energy and emissions project was not at the expense of other aspects of sustainability. There was a significant amount of energy put into innovative approaches to address water efficiency. There is a rainwater capture and storage facility in the basement of the building, and that's used for toilet flushing through a purple pipe system. Life cycle impacts were very carefully considered, as I alluded to, and then there was significant work around the facility in Swan Mall in terms of site development and its alignment with our Indigenous strategy, and Indigenous approaches to management of the land. And then finally, very significant focus on human health and well-being, and daylighting and occupant comfort. There is a significant photovoltaic component, more than 500 megawatts of renewable energy annually in 3 areas. One is on the roof of the tower. That equipment is still being installed. It's not yet operational. There were delays associated with COVID and a number of other factors, so that is underway now. And then the third and fourth components are both on the block. There is a rooftop solar array on the block on the right-hand side. And then significantly, there is envelope integrated PV on the block on the south and west facades. And again, that totals about 500 megawatts of renewable energy. So how does this thing actually perform? And looking back, what do we see as the critical success factors or lessons associated with the project? And there are a number of good ones. So I'm not able to share with you the actual performance data. The building has been open for 2 years. Yes, unfortunately, it opened just a couple months before COVID. And it was a phased occupancy. So it opened in the fall of 2019, but we really haven't had even a partial full occupancy through the life of the building to date. The solar PV, as I mentioned, has not been operational. So not that we don't want to share the data, it's that the data we have is not terribly meaningful and really not indicative of how the building will ultimately perform once we start to see what we expect to be a full occupancy load beginning at some point early in 2022. But when we have that data, we will be very happy to come back in a similar forum and share that with the wider community. But what I can share is relative to our baseline for institutional buildings in Canada and your typical LEED Silver building, the predicted performance of the McKimmie complex overall, when it is fully operational in terms of the solar PV array, and it has a full occupant load and complement of staff and students, will be in excess of 85%. We're aiming for close to a 90% reduction in both energy and emissions associated with operating that facility. And notably,
Graham, just a quick note for you here. You've got about 2 minutes left.
Okay, great. I've just got one more slide.
Great, thank you.
I also note that reduction is linked to about an 8.5% increase in floor area. So it is a very significant reduction in energy and emissions. 2 more slides. Sorry, Dick. So the building has achieved zero carbon building certification through the Canada Green Building Council for the design. We are pursuing operational certification once we have 12 months of good data. So again, once that's available to us, we'll circle back and share that with you. The building is also targeting LEED Platinum through the Canada Green Building Council. And finally, I just want to leave you with some conclusions around what made this project successful. Fundamentally, the university started with a very clear vision around not just what this project needed to look like, but how the campus is approaching climate action, and specifically how it needs to approach existing building retrofit work. So when the opportunity arose to retrofit this project, it wasn't a battle to sell a zero carbon approach to the building. It was part of our planning, part of our visioning, and part of our aspirations as a campus for this building. It's important to focus on the total cost of ownership versus component cost. I indicated there's a positive NPV, but that really only works when we're looking at the entirety of a facility and the entirety of the systems within it, and we're looking at a lifespan in excess of 50 years. I talked about getting the right team and embracing the integrated design process. I don't think I can emphasize enough how important it is to get a team that is experienced with this kind of design work and this kind of building performance. It is a different process, it's a different design, and it is a different skill set, particularly when it comes to building performance modeling and driving the design from a place of energy data and emissions management. Reconsidering how one defines comfort. The set points in this building are 23, 24, and 25 degrees. So we did not design to the standard ASHRAE requirements. And that requires, the last point, a very significant amount of engagement and partnering with building occupants in order to make the building work and in order to make those occupants comfortable. And finally, number 2 there, identifying the right project. That is really about taking a portfolio-based approach to existing building retrofits. And just take you back to one of the initial slides I showed you that reflected the energy and emissions impact of our top 3 and our top 10 buildings. Not every project is going to be the right project for existing building retrofits, and not every project is going to be a whole building retrofit like this one. There will be a majority of opportunities will really be at a systems level and may actually require a phased approach. And in order to do that and to do that well, you need actionable data, and that data comes from a whole building energy modeling analysis of the top performers, or the worst performers rather, in your portfolio. So there's a lot of homework that an organization needs to do to identify the right building. And I will leave you with that. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I look forward to chatting further with the panel and the audience at the end.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Graham. Really appreciate this. And so wonderful to see that building going up here in Calgary. Thank you so much for giving us that information.
My
so
pleasure.
on to our next speaker that I would like to introduce. That is Lloyd Suchet. He's the Executive Director of Building Owners and Managers Association of Calgary, also known as BOMA. And Lloyd joined BOMA in Calgary in 2015, and prior to that served 2 years as the association's Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs. He brings to BOMA Calgary his experience as political staff to a federal cabinet minister and as an academic researcher at the University of Calgary. Lloyd holds a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Alberta and a Master's of Public Policy from the University of Calgary, and he's a certified association executive. Lloyd, over to you today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Dick. And of course, thank you, Emily, City of Calgary, Earth Day Canada, TD, and of course, all of the participants here today for having me and for engaging in this really important discussion. As Dick said, I'm Lloyd Suchet. I've been with BOMA Calgary for 8 years, 6 as executive director. And so I'm not a trained expert in this field, certainly like my esteemed co-panelists, and I understand a lot of the participants here today are. And so today I'm speaking to you more based on my experiences working with those companies and the people who own and manage commercial spaces in Calgary. And as you'll see in my presentation, also from our institutional experience delivering a voluntary commercial benchmarking program across Canada for the past 13 years, in fact, called BOMA BEST, BEST being an acronym for Building Environmental Standards. So first, a little bit about BOMA. BOMA is a professional association with local associations across North America, as well as national affiliations around the world. So really, it's is a worldwide community of commercial real estate professionals. Broadly, we represent the commercial real estate sector with an emphasis on the management and the operations functions. This means the vast majority of our members are property management or operations professionals, all the way from an on-site operator to sort of the VPs in the C-suite. So, normal times at BOMA event, one of my favorite parts is you'll have people at luncheons in operations coveralls all the way to suit and tie. So that's a bit of the flavor of BOMA Calgary and sort of BOMAs across the world. And so my presentation, as I mentioned, is based around the learnings through that BOMA Best program. So weaving in data from reporting with on the ground operational challenges that we see in the industry. I'll also try to shine a light on an area where I don't think quite gets the focus it deserves, and that's the role of management and operational professionals who ensure all the components of sustainable buildings work in unison, and the way they ought to have sort of a key role in these conversations and a voice to help us move forward to net zero. That's not to suggest that technology, design, thermal efficiency aren't crucial. They are, but it's simply to say that having them isn't sufficient. We need well-trained professionals to maximize that impact. This is also important because the reality is, and as other presenters have mentioned, the building stock in Calgary is not young. Avison Young recently reported that 34% of office buildings are in the 40 to 49 year range in Calgary. That's slightly younger than Edmonton, but drastically older than the rest of the country. These are nearing the end of their life cycle. And given the current slow leasing climate due to economic challenges, and sort of that consequential pressure on budgets, we essentially have to work with what we've got. That puts emphasis on management and operations in addition to those deeper retrofits that my co-panelists have spoken to. So I'll also preface my comments by cautioning against making too broad a conclusion in the commercial industry. Industry actors are not homogenous. Their impacts and their ability to implement actions to support net zero vary quite widely. There's effectively a spectrum ranging from generally newer buildings with ownership that has more resources to implement some of these measures, all the way to sort of older buildings with smaller landlords and less financial flexibility. These are the ones who really have to do more with less. And so I can tell you the first group is fully on board with the sustainability goals we speak of, not just because they can afford it, but because the market, their customers, are very clearly demanding it louder and louder every single year. Net zero goals at the corporate level, they remain rare, but we are seeing higher end institutional landlords with those public and clear goals and targets, as well as regular reporting. And this is a clear sign of what's to come for all industry players. But it's the second less well-resourced group where we have the greatest opportunity to make the greatest impact. And when we speak to government, we always point out that these older buildings with less resources remain the low-hanging fruit. The cash flow issues make it hard to implement some of these longer-term payback items. And so this is also a group where sustainable management can have the most impact. Not only are they less likely to make a deep retrofit, they're also less well-staffed, making the types of management solutions we'll talk about sort of more important. These are the properties where staff isn't dedicated to a single building. A property manager or an operator might have 4 or 5 buildings under their purview. These are properties, and this absolutely still happens, where utilities are tracked on an Excel spreadsheet to give you a picture of where some buildings are. And so I give you this as background because it illustrates how we at BOMA came to our solution, or at least our contribution to the fight towards net zero. And in 2007, BOMA across Canada created this BOMA Best tool, and it was part of it was recognizing those that have gone that extra level. But more to it, it was designed as a management tool to enable the on-site teams to assess, refine, and improve building operations. And more to it than that, it was designed so that those individuals themselves could implement the program, a principle that endures to this day. Consultants absolutely can be used, they are used, but it is created so that a building team themselves can implement it. This also ensures that our members who fall into that latter, less well-resourced group, the low-hanging fruit, can easily enter the program and begin their sustainability journey. I'll very briefly describe a little bit how it works, and you can see the flow on the bottom there. It can be a 6 to 9 month process. It's depending on where you are in your journey. If you're tracking on a spreadsheet, you may have a little bit more work to do. But there's 5 levels of certification, beginning certified at the lower end, moving up through the precious metals. Every building submits what we call the 16 best practices. These are the sort of backbone of the program, and it essentially verifies that a building is doing such, what we would call a baseline measure as, energy management plans, reduction targets, water assessment management plans, green cleaning programs, waste audits, these types of baseline information. For the lowest certification level, all you need to do is those benchmarks. But for anything else, there is you move on to a questionnaire that asks for and evaluates real performance data, and then benchmarking activities. So this questionnaire and the data is then reviewed by a third-party verifier who comes on site for verification and audit. That audit then confirms your score, and your building is certified for 3 to 4 years. And this is where the management tool piece comes in. There is a full online portal. It speaks with Energy Star, but buildings are given a roadmap for the next 3 to 4 years. If it's designed as a progressive program for you to move up the ranks, and once you've gone through this benchmarking process, it gives you a roadmap to improve your score and to move up to the next level, and essentially empowers operation teams in a way that engages them in their buildings in ways that they often never were before. A nice side benefit of all this work is that it gives us access to 13 years of data from buildings across Canada, all of which is published in BOMA Canada's National Green Building Report. There's obviously selection bias in the people that participate in this program. They're probably more likely to be interested in doing these things, but nonetheless, it's a broad data set that we can draw some conclusions from. And so I'll focus the rest of my comments in particular on the 6 areas that we focus on within the program, and that fit nicely within the theme of today's presentation. That is energy, carbon, water, waste, resilience, and the human experience. So we'll start with energy, the big one, and this certainly drives much of the BOMA Best program, and indeed much of building staff's work as they look to reduce their energy use. As my co-panelists pointed out, commercial buildings use plenty of data. The building sector at large does. On our side, it's particularly driven by the need to heat spaces. About 54% of energy use is heating in a commercial building. And so the bigger solutions are quite well covered. Boiler replacement, recommissioning yield big results. Obviously, Graham spoke to a number of incredible initiatives that make a serious impact in this area. But as Betsy pointed out as well, these can be costly, they can be time consuming, they can be complex. And for a lot of buildings, they're really not part of the short or medium term picture. But the good news is there's really interesting findings on the smaller scale solutions that we think can really help drive savings for those older buildings. For example, LED lighting, I know we speak so much about it, and my assumption was that the vast majority of buildings had already switched to LED, simply because it's so cost effective. But in truth, even within BOMA Best, we have nearly half of buildings yet to implement it, a clear area for improvement. That being said, we're also seeing buildings taking advantage of simply putting in automatic lighting controls has led to a 38% lower energy use intensity compared to buildings without. Likewise, heat recovery systems, although not widely used in Alberta yet, are providing 23% lower EUI on the broader national data set. So again, showing an opportunity perhaps. And here's my BOMA bias coming in, but on the pure management and operations aspect of energy, there's fascinating findings, and that is having site-specific and equipment-specific operations manuals for staff. This leads to a 27% lower EUI than those without. Equipment scheduling leads to 35% lower EUI. Finally, buildings that share energy use data with their tenants are seeing 11% lower UI. And I can tell you, actually, one of the top performing buildings in Calgary, I'm not sure if they still do, but they would publish for all their tenants floor by floor energy use to give the entire building a picture for where everybody is. But these are meaningful improvements that require really no capital upgrades and simply are empowering the people in the building to try to get the most out of it. Altogether, this has yielded significant savings in energy since the program was brought in. Overall use is reduced by 25% nationwide, 16% in Alberta, so we're lagging a bit. This national number in dollars and cents represents a 67-cent per square foot savings in energy costs, which in added to some of these other BOMA best pieces is not insignificant, especially in competitive environments like we're in. And the trend is heading in the right direction, where by 2030 we're forecast to a 33% reduction. Moving on to carbon, obviously another key part of the questionnaire and management tool, but also for reasons we've touched on already, is an area where Alberta is challenged with due to the nature of its grid. Nonetheless, through benchmarking nationwide, we've seen that 84% reduction in GHG emissions since the program began. That's 27,000 tons. And the strategies commercial buildings are using generally depends on the grid. Lower carbon grids in BC, Manitoba, and Ontario and Quebec tend to focus on heating, while higher carbon grid jurisdictions like certainly ourselves in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Nova Scotia tend to use strategies of electricity use reduction. And so again, we go back to LED retrofits, lighting controls. But another one that emerges here is variable speed drives for your HVAC and fans. And indeed, the data is showing that Alberta is a leader in this. 77% of BOMA best buildings have that technology in place. And this compares to 45% in Saskatchewan, 33% in Nova Scotia. So certainly an interesting story and maybe some lessons to be learned there. But certainly as Alberta's grid hopefully shifts to the lower emissions, lower carbon, the opportunities for buildings to shift their strategies towards those heating consumption issues, and it might sort of drive that change in a way that we haven't quite seen yet in Alberta. The other, in addition to not just boilers, but actually efficient windows and heat recovery technologies are really emerging in those lower carbon grid jurisdictions. On the heat recovery technology piece, Manitoba leads the nation with 50% of their certified buildings using this technology. So we expect the downward trend to accelerate largely by changing grids, certainly in the Alberta context, but with 50% reductions by 2030. 50% reductions on today's values by 2030. Thanks. Sorry. We also focus a lot on water within BOMA Best because buildings use a lot of it. 32% of which is standard domestic water use. And frankly, this is an area where we see a need for a lot of improvements within our building stock. BOMA Best buildings have seen a 36% reduction since the program began. That's 27% better than the national average. And again, the solutions we see being used are high efficiency toilets, urinals, faucets, as sort of the more commonly used tools. The image on the slide shows how Platinum, our highest level certified buildings, leverage this technology versus other ones, and sort of as the market differentiators for them. And in fact, for your average 10-story office building with 1,000 occupants, high efficiency toilets alone save 4.5 million liters of water. That's a cost savings of $10,000 a year. Likewise, high efficiency faucets are showing 9% reductions for all those buildings. Looking at sort of the human element, outdoor landscaping, even indoor gardens, these are all emerging as factors in water use, with many buildings shifting towards sort of native plants and stormwater, as Graham mentioned with McKinney. Technology has a clear role to play in this space. If high efficient irrigation is showing 8% reductions for use in these buildings. So we're seeing these technologies and management programs being implemented. We also see larger water water intensive systems are now having leak identifiers, fault identifiers on them so that you can identify those just a little bit quicker. And I said it interestingly and challenging for our sector, because what we've seen through BOMA Best is that as those B and C class buildings enter the program, their water management somewhat dramatically lags behind those already in it. And so, you know, more so than energy, more so than carbon, more so than waste, it's this area that they seem to lag behind. That said, the broad trend is still going in the right direction with 5% annual reductions in BOMA Best buildings. I'll touch briefly on waste. This is one that sort of emerged as a key shift in the industry when I began at BOMA, and was quite dramatically accelerated by the city's own policies, particularly that move to organic separation a few years back. Sophisticated programs in commercial buildings are now the norm, and so you can see that the vast majority of programs have diversion programs and are seeing really good rates. But we view this as so important because for the average employee in the average office building, waste management is the most tangible interaction they have with a building's own sustainability programming. They are physically required to contribute to it by putting waste in the appropriate receptacle. And so this means that building management and operation plays an oversized role relative to technology. And the hallmark of an effective program in the office environment is that it educates tenants and provides sort of easy to use and intuitive instructions. So for an office, engaging tenants is the key, but in retail environments, it tends to change a little bit. Especially in malls with food courts, it tends to be a more centralized management-driven program. Potentially, they sort their own waste. I know Chinook Center, the food court does its own separation. They just find it easier and more effective in achieving those diversion goals. There's also been a fair amount of media coverage and ink spilled on final destination of waste, and so. You know, is it essentially going to where we say it's going? Commercial properties can't take advantage of the city's municipal waste programs. They rely on private providers. And so we started tracking this within BOMA Best and found that 70% of those buildings that achieve gold or above are actually verifying where their waste goes. So there's being introduced that level of accountability to the waste picture.
Lloyd, sorry to interrupt. I'm going to give you 2 more minutes so that we can have a few minutes for our panel as well. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dick. I'll race through and I'll touch on resilience because this is really an emerging topic. Betsy touched on it. It's so important. So important that in 2019, our BOMA Canada created a resiliency guidebook, and the call to action was in recognition of the tangible impact climate change is already having on buildings. Certainly in Alberta, I think we're a little bit ahead of the curve due to you know, hail, floods, snowmageddon, snow timber, whatever you want to call it, heat waves, wildfires. But I think, you know, this sort of the short-term planning versus long-term planning is a bit of a concern. I think we're really well prepared for short-term emergencies, but are we that adaptation and mitigation planning isn't quite there. So the resilience guidebook provides a bit of that flow chart on the right hand of your screen that walks building management through the process of creating long-term planning for this. So a piece that we think is important. And just I'm going to leave you with the human experience because it's another more recent emergence in the sector, and it's essentially making spaces healthier and more enjoyable for those who spend time in them. The pandemic has and will continue to dramatically change what the office looks like. But even prior to COVID, the tenant market was being influenced by that tech industry model and by that sort of shift of making the office more enjoyable for the employee and, by the way, more productive for the employer. The emergence of hybrid workforces through COVID, in addition to already low demand for office space, is continuing to drive landlords to offer value in new ways. And the ways they're doing that are those lifestyle improvements. We look at biophilic features that simply enhance human enjoyment we like looking at plants. It makes us happier. It makes us more productive. Noise, which our tenants are telling us kills productivity. And finally, the type of urban renewal we're seeing in Calgary and in those neighborhoods surrounding downtown has led to a proliferation of alternative modes of transit. We have an incredible cycle track network. We have a bike pathway. They are well used all year round, and the norm in buildings now is to have infrastructure to support that. All this is going towards that human piece. And so I'll just finish it off by saying that these are the key areas we look at and they contribute to sustainable buildings in our opinions. And so I hope you got a picture a little bit for how commercial buildings are trying to address some of these challenges, what their impact is, certainly where we can do better. And the lesson is that benchmarking works, and it also gives us a picture of where we can do better. But I also hope you get a new appreciation for the role people in the buildings play and how management ought to play a greater role in this conversation. The technology, the base building, and the people in it all need to work together to maximize impact. And so the management and operational professionals are sort of uniquely positioned to do that and have that role to play. So thank you for your time. I really look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. Really appreciate that. And audience, as you can hear, there's a lot of information. We won't have too much time for the discussion today, 13 minutes left. So I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to pick a few questions for the panel today from our Q&A. Emily, I just want to make sure, can our presenters see the Q&A?
Yes, they should be able to see them. The audience doesn't, though. So if you want to speak the questions, that would be better. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask 2 questions to just get us going here. And folks, I would really like to ask you, please keep your answers to less than 20 seconds so that we can punch through this. I would love to encourage a discussion here today. I have a question here. If cost savings aren't enough to motivate building upgrades in some buildings, what else is needed to drive deep retrofits? Are there Calgary-specific barriers preventing action? To any of the speakers.
I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead, Betsy.
Well, I'll just quickly say, I think the typical barriers are the same universally. It's that initial capital outlay. I think Calgary has some real opportunity as being in a province that has a PACE legislation. And, for many of the reasons that Beaumont is arguing for commercial buildings, when you have trained professionals that can actually activate on some of the recommendations, a PACE program for commercial buildings is actually one of your best opportunities. Go ahead.
Thank you, Betsy. Lloyd, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, and I was just going to jump in and sort of build on my point in my comments, where essentially the Alberta's grid, they game it. They realize that in the Beaumont West context, you can get better scores in other areas just because the grid is so carbon intensive. And so I think, realistically, buildings see that, they notice it. That's in addition to obviously the cost and the staffing and complexity piece. But it's sort of easier to see benefits elsewhere for certainly some buildings.
Great, thank you so much for that. I'm going to throw out one more question here. What's the best way to get more buildings into the Beaumont West program? I think that one is directly for you, Lloyd.
Yeah, we sort of take 2 strategies where on the higher end of the industry, it's that leadership piece. We like it when our large institutional landlords demonstrate that leadership. We like it when institutions demonstrate that leadership, but the challenge is getting the older B and C class buildings into it. And it is a bit of a dollar and figures issue, but it's a resourcing issue. You've got a property manager who is being, they would be the ones largely implementing a lot of this. They've got 4 buildings. One has a flood. One has a tenant complaining about a washroom key. It's sort of, there's a human element to this.
Totally. So just a general statement or maybe summary from what I've heard through each of these conversations and presentations, there's definitely an opportunity to make a difference. That opportunity lies within each and every building, and they are very individual, and change It's not the same across the board, but there are programs that you could actually introduce to all buildings as such that they can participate in. One of them, for instance, the benchmarking program, Lloyd, what you introduced. And Betsy, like you said, there are certain legislative levers or from a municipal level as well that you could utilize, such as the STEP code, for instance. So I wanted to understand, in your opinion, and Graham, also listening to you, for you guys that have actually done a complete retrofit to net zero, what are the barriers then to really bring these things to fruition to buildings? Why aren't we advancing at a much faster pace? I know their funding is the big one. We heard that, capital investment. But how are there other legislative levers that we could utilize or that should be introduced at the local level if we look at buildings broadly to enable them to move forward into this direction?
Can I jump in there?
Yep.
I'm sorry that the last two slides were probably the most relevant to this question. You know, I think that you have a really great start to, you know, the plan. Key in there, though, are having clear targets and timelines. Without that clarity, the regulatory clarity, we don't see, you know, even it's everywhere, from the building owners to the service providers to equipment manufacturers and importers, and everybody needs to have that signal of this is the direction that we're going, and so you better get ready to do it. So, you know, just like Lloyd was saying, we see it coming that we're going to have to make these improvements. So, you know, doing it ahead of time just puts people at a, you know, gives them a leg up. But without that clarity, I don't think we're going to get that kind of like mobilization.
Thank you. The other two speakers, Graham and Lloyd.
I might just add to that I think Betsy's spot on. If the last 25 years of updates to building codes have taught us anything, and there's been significant changes in federally and in British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec, and others, the vast majority of owners are building to code, and until we change code, and I also include code for existing buildings, until there's a reporting, a benchmarking, a disclosure, and a minimum set of requirements for energy performance in the existing building space, we'll continue to have a group of leaders that are doing this work. In some cases on a positive payback model, in some cases not. But the vast majority of our portfolio owners will be tracking at current code requirements or slightly better. So we've really got to change the legislative and policy framework.
Thank you, Graham. Lloyd, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I know. I think Graham really touched on that key issue. There's you know, those who believe in all of this are by and large already moving towards it. There's a significant amount of people who, like you said, they build to code. This isn't high up on their list, and really until it's put higher up on the policy agenda, it probably won't be. We try to get them in to say it's coming. You need to know what you're working with, but it's a hard conversation.
Thank you.
I
wanted to quickly give an up. Sorry, Betsy, I heard your voice there. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, you know, I think building codes are just so slow to move and change. And as I mentioned, the retrofit code has already been deferred to 2030, which is a second deferral. It was due out 2022. And I think we actually really just don't even have time to wait. And, you know, municipalities, a lot of this work is being downloaded increasingly to municipalities, and we need to get really creative on what other tools are actually available. The building codes are they're just too slow. Yeah, we're going to keep pushing on them. They need to catch up, quite frankly, to what industry can actually do. So, you know, we need to actually get really creative about the levers that are there. And I think that's where the December session, follow-up session of this is going to get really interesting. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's just quickly hear another question. What is the most important role of builders and building managers in supporting the change to lowering buildings' carbon emissions? Maybe if we start with, I think, Graham, you started speaking about that, what you guys did specifically at the McKinney Center. Did you want to maybe answer that for us as a kickoff?
Sure. I think just quickly, I think the most important responsibility is to understand your footprint at a portfolio level. And if I go back to that chart that I showed you, the story at the University of Calgary is that, you know, we've only got about 10 buildings that represent well over half of our footprint. And that tells the institution that we've got to focus our energy, obviously on the whole portfolio in terms of best practices, but where we need to dive deep and spend money and invest time and energy in new processes and new design, it's in those 10 buildings. So similarly, commercial building owners, I would argue, should be looking at a similar approach to their portfolio, because in almost every case, I think we'll find that the vast majority of emissions are associated with a small number of buildings. And if we can get capital and relatively cheap capital, access to relatively cheap capital for building owners and operators for that limited number of buildings, we can move the dial pretty quickly and pretty significantly without looking at the entire portfolio. So that's where you need to start.
Thank you so much. Lloyd, any comments from your end, what you hear from your members?
Yeah, no, again, Graham hit the nail on the head on that point. I like to focus my comment. How it operates really does matter. We're coming around to that knowledge there. 10 years ago, there was lots of stories about buildings built to the highest standard with every technology conceivable, and turned out to be quite poor operators just because partially the uses within them. So I think sort of the management side of it really, I on our call yesterday, I referred to them as the conductor in an orchestra, but all these pieces really need to work well together. But at the same point, Graham is right, where you can have a huge impact on a relatively small number of buildings, and it's reaching out to them and giving them, whether it's the resources or the capacity to do so.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I want to, because we've got about 2 minutes left here, and I want to ask our speakers, please take a look again at the Q&A if you can answer some of those questions. And Emily, there's also been a few comments made. If you can perhaps move that over to the chat, that'll be great for people to see that. I thought it was brilliant, the comments that I've seen, and I believe it's a good thing to actually post that in our chat as well. I want to conclude by asking each of you for a final statement. And again, I know you've got a lot to say, and we are looking forward to the next discussion as well. But Betsy, maybe starting with you, what is your parting message to us in 15 seconds or less? It sounds like we're on CBC and I'm hosting a political discussion here. But in 15 seconds or less, Betsy, what are your parting words for us here on this discussion today to Calgary?
Yeah, thanks. I think that what we have is a clear path that we have to take. What we don't know yet is what our mechanism is to get there. And it's going to take creativity and collaboration across the board, from owners to financiers to regulators to suppliers. And this conversation is going to start to kick off that kind of first step forward.
Thank you so much, Betsy. Graham, your parting words in 15 seconds.
I think I'd say that single projects are really important, and I think the McKimmie story is an example of that. Don't give up. Find one or two projects that are potentially very high impact, and focus time and energy on those.
Thank you so much, Graham. And the last comment to you, Lloyd.
And yeah, I'll just build on that by saying, the benchmarking principle still matters. If it matters, measure it. That's the first step to the sustainability journey. That unlocks, this 5, 10, 15, 20-year roadmap to unlocking, net zero in your buildings.
Fantastic. Folks, I really want to thank Betsy, Graham, and Lloyd. I wish we had more time for this discussion because I think we're just getting started and heating this up. Emily and the rest of the team, also a big thank you to you, as well as TD Friends of the Environment. Can't thank you enough for introducing this to us and to Calgary, and also this discussion across our nation. I'm really looking forward to the next one that we could have. And folks, thank you so much on this lovely morning. I hope you have a great day further on. Thank you so much and have a great day.